Welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. I'm your host, Roshan and I have with me a very special guest. Indus Khaitan is a serial entrepreneur with multiple exits, and he's also had interesting roles like the head of growth at ChargeBee. He also founded what I think is one of the earliest accelerators in India, the amazing Morpheus Gang, which had alumni like HackerRank, Practo, and Common Floor, among many others. He's now the founder and CEO of Quolum, which helps optimize software spend. We have plenty to talk about. In fact, we spoke for a good 15 minutes before this. So, welcome, Indus. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, morning, Roshan. Great to be on this podcast.
Yeah, fantastic to have you here. So, in this, broadly, if I look at your 20-year career, you've been an entrepreneur, you've been an operator, you've also been a big company exec at Oracle, I think, right? And each of these are such distinct roles, I would say, with some few meaningful overlaps. What have you learned from each of these roles?
Great question. So I think when I look back, one thing I realized that, how emotional I was in the spur of the moment around a certain event or a certain role or certain task that has been given to me. And then when I look back on those moments, sometimes those were totally useless moments to even have a recall. And some moments were totally amazing. So I think one learning was we over-index on a day-to-day activity in any organization. If you had a career of, let's say, a 3-year gig at a large company,
Yeah.
you will not remember what happened on a day-to-day basis. You'll remember what you accomplished on a year-to-year basis. So I think what I've learned is let's not over-index on what happens on a day-to-day basis, but optimize what we can achieve towards the end of like a quarter, year, or 3 to 5 years that we spend. And even bigger than that, it's kind of funny, but if I would have to go back, I would keep my emotions in check.
Right.
um,
Is that acutely is that acutely a startup thing though? I mean, the fact that you live and die on a daily basis?
I think it's not just a startup thing. It's also, human beings run on emotions. Either we are so elated and happy about our achievements, or we are sad about not able to accomplish that task.
Mm.
Uh, there's very much in between, kind of somber flat line. And this is what kind of makes or break a day, like on an ongoing basis. So if we know when to be happy, if we know how to control our sadness, and then just work on the checklist, get our things done on a daily basis, screw all the emotions out of the picture, I think 90% of the job would be done. I think that's one big thing I learned. Second one I would say is I would get tired initially in my early days that, hey, I'm an engineer, I'm a computer scientist, I know how to write code. That's what I'm going to do. If you need to get X, Y, and Z done, no, that's not my territory. But over a period of time, I learned that you have to come out of your core area. If you are an engineer and you have to do things only that you've been trained on, then you're missing out on marketing, on sales, on support, on content writing, and how to build interpersonal relationships. As an engineer, you are focused on your computer and writing code, right?
Yeah.
When you start doing the other things that are important, that's when you realize the world is much bigger. And that actually preps you for entrepreneurship, that, hey, you can be jack of all trades beyond the code that you wrote, or the pull request that you generated.
Right. Yeah, so you also operated at the overlaps, right? At the overlap of product, marketing, and so on. Like your role at ChargeBee, for example, where you headed growth. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, ChargeBee was very interesting. I remember when Krish and I and Rajaraman, the two co-founders, when uh, Krish and I started chatting, what I realized that ChargeBee was a phenomenal product. Amazing content engine they had written, amazing bottoms up marketing engine they had built. People loved the customer support and so much transparency. Krish would go onto the forums and
Yeah.
respond to issues. He would reply to emails, be on support calls, and that's what drove the love for the ChargeBee product. And when we started chatting, so Krish and I had a very open discussion in terms of, Indus, what do you want to do? What problems you want to solve. And then he started laying down in terms of these are the issues that he thinks I can solve. And some of the things I discovered was that product was not widely known beyond the startup circles. There was not much media coverage. Analysts did not know about it. A lot of other SaaS vendors wanted to integrate, but the engineering team was busy focused on the core platform. So it was perceived as a tool for startups and for smaller companies. And Krish wanted to change that perception and change the game and go bigger, mid-size and larger enterprise. So basically I joined and we started a growth, not having a better department name. Hey, let's do a growth organization. Okay. And then get people who could solve at the intersection of product, sales, marketing, and customer success issues. And then, hey, let's just run some experiments, not as a growth hack, but experiments sustained over a period of time. So, we did partnerships, we did analysts and press relationships, we did big events, SaaSter sponsorship. We created new programs such as ChargeBee for startups. We reorchestrated the freemium, and overall driving lead gen, driving awareness, so that ChargeBee becomes a much bigger global presence than, hey, these are the cool guys solving a problem for startup.
Right.
One thing I want to add is, for me, I was not a SMB SaaS guy. I had done startups that were in large enterprise plays. And I mentioned this to Chris, and Chris said, no, I will teach you that. And that got me sold into the job.
So there are multiple things I want to drill down on, right? The one is the fact that you mentioned that moving from startups and SMB to mid-market or large enterprise, and that's a journey that plenty of startups are planning to do, right? I mean, bump up their ACVs and so on. Any tips or tricks or any observations that you've noticed in this journey that could be useful for our listeners?
I think what happens typically in the startup cohort that is coming out of India, especially, a lot of bottom-up content marketing and or hustle-driven marketing is done to drive the first few million.
Yeah.
The challenge is it forces you what I call as a local maxima trap, which is you think you're doing great, but in the bigger scheme of things, you're just like a small puddle in a larger ocean. And startups fail to generate awareness and demand gen from people who are in the mid-size companies. Mid-size meaning 250 million revenue
Managers.
or so. Yeah. So the tip I have is you have to figure out an awareness hack that people in the larger circles know about it. Either do via events. So especially in case of ChargeBee, the events hack worked out beautifully for us. So we showed up at least 6 or 7 very large events that mattered to our customers and us jointly. And that raised our profile. The investment was like, for a SaaSter large booth was, let's say, $60,000-$70,000, but the ROI was millions of dollars downstream, 3 to 6 months down the road. So you have to take those bets. That's where you could bootstrap with a few $1 million, but get, let's say, a 5 to 10 million Series A, and then say how big can you go. Second, you cannot go to big companies by being in India. You got to be closer to your customer. And I think there is a school of thought that disagrees with that, but I think you have to figure out how to be closer to the customers, either fly daily or be there on a daily basis, because the perception matters. If you call a customer, it's 10 a.m. in the morning and he's based out of California. If your opening greeting is, yeah, I'm planning to hit bed in like an hour from now.
Yeah.
Versus, yeah, I also see sunshine, sun is about to come out. The emotional connect changes the perception of who you are, where you are. The vicinity and the proximity makes a different conversation altogether.
Yeah. And the legendary American small talk as well, right?
It matters. Hey,
a huge deal. Yeah.
Did you see that game yesterday night? Versus, they may know about cricket. You can talk about cricket, but the connect is much more deeper when those two emotions collide with each other or resonate with each other, for a better word.
Yeah. No, one of the key things I've noticed, is the change of selling to users versus selling to buyers. So when you're selling to startups and SMBs, likely you're selling to the user himself or herself. And when you're selling to larger organizations, you're selling to buyers, right? I mean, these are people who are buying it for their team. So you could think about any large enterprise product. And that's like a key mindset shift, I feel, you know?
It is, because the buyers are essentially the gatekeepers to the users.
Right.
And hence, the sales process is no longer the aha moment that is
Precisely.
normally
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
versus the value moment. Hey, is this ROI? Is this
Exactly.
perception? Is this long term?
Yeah.
Versus short term dopamine of aha that you give to users matters a lot.
Yeah. So the other thing that you also mentioned kind of qualifies as building a brand, right? We've seen that, how software is getting commoditized, right? I mean, there's no new category as such that doesn't have 40 other people competing for the same thing. And here, companies like Drift, for example, have shown that brand can help you, like, capture not just a larger portion of the pie, but also, I mean, like crazy deals, right? I mean, like at the end of the day, Drift is a phenomenal website chat, you know. And website chat has been around for like 10 years or 15 years, I can remember, right? And you still have free plugins and everything, but Drift can still charge about $500 or $600 a month. I mean, no taking away from their product, right? I mean, the product is amazing, and I've compared like 4 or 5 or more, right? It's amazing, but the fact that they can also charge these premiums is also because of pioneering this brand of conversational marketing, and not just positioning it as a website chat, right, as a neat tool or a neat plugin as such. So how important is brand in your estimation in this journey?
I think you answered that question. I think it is 100% a differentiator when three vendors are on the table, and the thing that we discussed, the buyers of five team of buyers trying to figure out which vendor to choose. Guess which one they're going to choose?
Yeah.
The one they have been to an event, the one that they see as a billboard at a station or an airport, and the one that they hear about, right? So, or a mix of all those three. Even if the features are 10-20% up or down, the
Yeah.
perception of recall matters a lot.
Yeah.
I think if you look at Salesforce as an example, the reason Salesforce still compounds and grows at 40% on that large base is because of the billions of dollars Mark Benioff throws into the marketing budget.
Yeah.
Why is Dreamforce the mega event it is? Because the recall generated across the buyer community is immense. It is the perfect example of you will not get fired for buying Salesforce.
Exactly.
Even if you know it, right?
Yeah.
In your own world, that 40% of data never gets into Salesforce. 70% of people never log in more than once in a month. They still have Salesforce.
Yeah. No, I mean, if founders are listening, right? It's like the adoption on Salesforce is less than 30%. That's crazy if you think about it. But then, I mean, they continue to be like the safe choice, right, for people. And at the end of the day, I think IBM pioneered that line in the 70s or 80s, where you won't get fired for buying an IBM, right? So they've kind of built that credibility for themselves, where you won't get fired for buying a Salesforce. Yes, I mean, crappy user experience. Yes, I mean, people may hate using it, whatever. But hey, you know. So let's talk about the Morpheus Gang, right? I think that's when I first heard of you. Um, I also feel it's the first proper accelerator, institutionalized accelerator around that time, right? I mean, I remember the Microsoft Accelerator and the Morpheus Gang, probably around that time, right? What was it like founding an early stage fund accelerator that time?
Yeah, it was, as an engineer, and Samir and I, Samir was my partner in crime at Morpheus. As an engineer, you always look for a another harder problem to solve, right? Hey, let's hold this candle and see how far can we walk in this total jungle of darkness, right? Without getting trampled by elephants coming out of nowhere. I think that's the journey every time an entrepreneur thinks about, hey, let's just do something crazy. And that was the moment. So I remember I moved to India, to Bangalore in 2008, 2009. And few years before that, I've seen the Valley's entrepreneurial ecosystem like up close. I was at the first startup school hosted by Y Combinator at the
Oh,
Kresge Auditorium at Stanford,
wow.
where Om Malik was one of the speakers and few others I don't recall. And he was speaking using flashcards, no PowerPoint or anything like that. That's why it's so vivid in my memory. And when I came back, I thought, hey, why is no angel network like active in India? There
Mm.
was Indian Angel Network that was founded a couple of years before I moved. There was Mumbai Angels doing some deals. I think if my memory serves right, a total of 10 investments were done between Mumbai Angels and Indian Angel Network in 2008. Total of 10 deals in a year.
It's crazy.
Imagine that. So Samir and I got together and I thought, hey, why don't we start something from scratch? And it was totally unfathomable. It took us almost 50 to 70 pitches that we talked to people, called them that, hey, we are raising a 1 crore fund to do 15 to 20 startup investments, 5 lakh rupees per startup. We'll run 2 batches, very similar to YC. We had no takers. 2009, 2010, no takers. But somehow we convinced a few friends, and Samir convinced a few common friends. We were able to raise that fund, and one of our early investments was Practo. And the moment Practo happened, and Sequoia did the Series A on Practo, the word got out. We had not purposefully we did not do a press release about Sequoia's Series A in Practo, but the word got out in the market that, hey, Practo, some random incubator, accelerator, Morpheus that was seeding Practo, raised a huge round from Sequoia. That was the arriving point for us. And that's when people found out about us, and then more and more startups started applying. I remember I was telling my wife, overnight I became a celebrity and a star, that people wanted to do interviews, TV and this and press and media on all of that. But I think it was fantastic. The early days of startup ecosystem, like amazing days, and we have come a long way since then.
Yeah, it's crazy. So when I look at the Morpheus cohort, right? I mean, it looks kind of like a community. That's kind of how you positioned it as well, right? What was it like working with those founders, those early founders?
So we were like an entrepreneur ourselves, right? So Samir had a startup. He built an early Netflix-like service that sold to somebody else, and I had a startup exit. So we were like not your run-of-the-mill investor. We were like, hey, uh, we'll do all sorts of things which I can't talk publicly about, and then we were friends with the entrepreneurs. Uh, so much so that we will sit and write code, we will design the marketing plan, we will build the website, and think of a slogan, think of a logo, think of a name, register a domain. You could imagine anything an entrepreneur does, anything and everything we would do with them. And it became like a partner in crime to build a business from day one. And especially Samir, he pitched it more like a community. I slightly brought in my US mindset to keep it more professional, but Samir did it right, that, hey, no, we have to keep it a little bit more informal. And I think that built a layer of camaraderie between the entrepreneurs and, of course, us quote unquote investors. Amazing time.
Yeah. Any legendary stories that sort of stick out in your mind?
I remember bumping into Shashank. So we hosted an event at IIM Bangalore. So, of course, we needed free space, free food to host an event because we were running on nothing. And Shashank and Abhinav had graduated from NIT Surathkal 2 months ago. And he came after the event and ended, after the panel discussion, saying, introduced himself to me and said, hey, we are two founders, we want to start a business. We already running a business out of college. We design web pages for doctors. And he pitched and we talked for 5 minutes, and immediately we said, yeah, we like you guys, but what you're working on is non-scalable, so I don't think there is any interest from us. And then we went back to the drawing board and asked Shashank what interests him. So healthcare, he had some stories about healthcare and intersection of information technology. And basically we sat down and, Practo in its early days got created. There's a much longer story after that, but maybe some other time.
Right.
This episode is brought to you by Mulya. You want to move fast? Sure. But without breaking things? Now that's a hard ask. The thing is, once you have some base of users and customers, you just cannot afford to risk quality. So how do the likes of Cred, Swiggy and Curefit, some of India's fastest growing startups, ship at lightning pace and delight their users and customers? Simple, they're working with Mulya as a strategic quality partner. Mulya is India's most talented and passionate community of testers. They've helped prevent thousands of bugs and regression issues. So as a CTO or a product owner, if you want to reduce tech debt, especially while you scale, do check out Mulya.com. I've interviewed Mulya's founder and CEO Pradeep on the podcast earlier, and we spoke about how startups can improve quality while scaling and things to that effect. You should definitely check it out. I'll link to it in the description below. Now back to your regular programming.
So if you look at the kind of startups that were being built those days, right? Those were marketplaces, e-commerce plays, and consumer apps, basically, right? B2B SaaS was still like a side actor, like a supporting actor, I would say, or somewhere. I think a cameo, basically, right?
Cameo, yes.
Yeah. So are you surprised how it's kind of evolved all along? I mean, to now when it's front and center.
I am surprised and scared at the same time because surprised definitely because enterprise software in B2B has been there. Oracle was started almost 45 years ago, right? IBM 60 years ago, and other companies that we don't even recall their names of. So I think B2B has been there for a long time. Enterprise software in last 20-30 years has gotten traction, but what is amazing is this cycle of SaaS being the lovely child and e-commerce and consumer out of fashion is just amazing. I would not have dreamed of founders raising on 150 million pre-money on 3 million revenue. There is an investment rumor that I've heard from Grapevine. A company has raised a pre-series A and then now raising a series A in just a short span of 6 to 7 months at a $250 million valuation.
Wow.
And I don't think they have customers that have gone live and they have revenue, which is more than $1 million. So
that's crazy.
It's absolutely crazy times. There are so many parallels to this. I do not know where this is going to end. We can riff about it for another 10 minutes, but good and bad, I would say.
Yeah. Overall, I think it's a net positive that there's cash in the system, because considering how it was, right? I mean, 2008, 2009, forget about napkin startups, right? I mean, you had a back of the napkin plan or whatever. I mean, even if you were doing reasonably all right, I mean, even if you had a product, a few customers, etc., you had to run pillar and post, right? And then you at the end of the day, you got shitty deals, right? I mean, man, I remember like first, your angels were notorious for this actually at that time, rating 40%, 50% of the equity. That's just crazy, right? And considering where we are right now, where founders have so much of optionality, right? I mean, not just in terms of money, in terms of everything else as well, all of the stuff that they can negotiate for. I think it's a plus one, I would say. I mean, definitely a plus for the ecosystem as such. But yeah, overall, I see what you're saying. I mean, it's it's crazy. I think it harks back to what we were talking about, which is like, pumping steroids into something and trying to get it to grow to some unimaginable length or breadth before it merits that,
No, that's true. I think that definitely +1 on this, because at least the founder has an option, right? So if a startup is raising at a 250 million valuation, it is the founder's choice to take that money or not. Now that is net positive. What you're relating to is absolutely correct, because 5-7 years ago, even 3 to 4 years ago, you not get deals, you not even get term sheets. So at least where we were versus where we are, I think super net positive that founders have options. The money, the fundraising is insane. Of course, as founders ourselves, we have to be careful about at what cost the money is coming in. If you raise at insane valuation and tomorrow if things are not right, you have to fire and let everybody go, because the board member who's sitting there is going to say, hey, where is my ARR? Because you raised that 100 or 200 million, whatever it is, right?
Yeah, I'm reminded of that scene from Silicon Valley where the guy says, you could say no. So what would your advice to founders be? Fundraising is definitely, I think it's a milestone activity where, the market, no, I won't say the market, but at least like a subset of people validate your idea, what you're doing. So it definitely feels good for a founder to see that kind of validation. But with respect to fundraising, what are the certain things that a founder should beware of, like before signing on the dotted line?
I think there's an old school parameter of, hey, every subsequent round, your valuation should go between 3 to 5x. Let's say if you raise that 10 million post in your seed, the next one should be 30 to 50. So you keep this as a healthy pace that that the revenue is going to grow 3 to 4x at the best, right? Not everybody's Slack, not everybody's Zoom, not everybody's Dropbox, right? And not everybody's Salesforce. So if that situation comes, it's a mighty bonus. But assume that revenue grows at 2 to 3x every year, and hence your fundraising multiples should also grow between 3 to 5x. Let's say you do every 2 to 3 years a subsequent set of rounds. That keeps a healthy pace, between 10 million seed to 40 to 50 million Series A to 100 to 150 million Series B, and then go beyond. But if you hit from a 10 million Series A, a 10 million seed to 100 million Series A, that may not, that's a promise that the founder may not be able to keep. Because ultimately founders are writing off based on a promise that they will deliver, right? And if they don't, the question is, should we replace the team or should we replace you? So guess what the founders are doing? They are calling scapegoats on their team, saying, hey, the sales guy did not deliver, let's replace him. The marketing person did not generate leads, let's fire and hire a new one. And that's not healthy. That's not building a business long-term, because ultimately, if you are at, let's take what's that number that is floated around, triple, double, triple, something like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Triple, double, I think.
Correct.
Something
so
like
if
that.
if you follow that, then you have to hit, let's say 70 to 80 million in ARR in 8 to 10 years, right? If you try to hit that number in first year or second year or third year, the laws of physics gets violated right there. So if you take that long-term view and build it according to that, I think it's a healthy and a sustainable growth. It's achievable growth. If you get a spike, that's a bonus.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of these valuations are also like people looking at the likes of Salesforce or the likes of Slack and saying, hey, you know what? They're actually returning so much of cash. They're doing like Salesforce, for example, so many $1 billion in ARR, right? And so the market absolutely justifies the kind of valuation. But then, this is ignoring, as you said rightly, the loss of physics, right? The fact that Salesforce first had to do $1 million, then a $5 million, and so on and so forth. It didn't just go from 0 to 100 million in 2 years or 3 years. It's insane. Yeah.
So, and then Salesforce did, there were probably 5 people competing for that same pie.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The market's bigger, but I think there's so many more people competing for the same pie. Yeah. Yeah. So, speaking of founders, any other attributes that you think are super critical? One of the things that you mentioned earlier was um, how Krish, was hands-on, and he said, "Hey, don't worry, I'll teach you about the rest of the stuff, right? As long as you bring this complementary aspect of enterprise to the fore." What are like 2 or 3 things that you've noticed among the best founders that you've worked with?
I think this is the first question I answered, that they don't get caught up on an everyday ups and downs. I think they think about the longer term horizon and say, hey, am I going to accomplish my goal in my 365 days effort rather than a day to day ups and down effort? I think that's number one. Number two is, I think, remaining happy 24/7. And I have realized this, especially during COVID. And I had my own, slingshot ups and downs moment in the first few months of COVID. And basically, I decided, yes, ultimately the business is going to get built. And these are the external variables I cannot control. So, how can I remain happy and satisfied on an everyday basis that, hey, I have a job to do, task list for today, let's just cross all the items off, move to the next day, and then accomplish more. I think if we just follow those two, I think rest is skills and mechanics of business building, nothing fancier than that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's such an important point, right? Because I think, again, in terms of leadership styles, the jobs style of leadership is sort of more famous or infamous, I should say, right? But then, I mean, I think the best founders I've seen also have a sense of equanimity, right? I mean, they don't get too hung up about the small things on a daily basis. Yes, I mean, they're passionate. It's not like they're passive about these things. They will acknowledge it, but then the way they tend to react is a lot more measured, and always add a lot more optimism, energy, calmness to the team, because you can't really be because they're looking at you. Essentially, the team is looking at you to add that sense of calm, that, hey, this is possible. I mean, yeah, we screwed up, but don't worry about it. This is possible, and here's how. So, yeah.
I would add to that. I think the team is looking at you as, are you the same person who's obsessed with your business on a daily basis? I think that's the trait they look for. That they don't look for anything else. Of course, they look for, overall excitement, overall calmness, and your day-to-day movement. But I think subconsciously they're judging you that, have you lost the interest in making this big, or are you the same obsessed person that you were yesterday? And they make the decision based on that.
Interesting. Yeah. And you can signal that in other ways, right? But not necessarily being like a hard taskmaster as such, with holding a cane in your hand.
Or not necessarily being a jerk. That
Yeah, exactly.
heard stories about other people. I think hard taskmaster, I would agree that one has to be, right?
Yeah.
So you cannot move the needle if you're not a taskmaster. But taskmaster by being a jerk, or
what I meant is being a jerk, actually. Yeah.
People will parse through that. They will agree to you, but then they'll move on 3 months down the road. They'll find something else. Because again, they want to go back happy to their family, to their kids, not necessarily have your anger shown on them and them being, unhealthy in their own daily lives, right? And they will move on sooner or later.
Yeah. So, SaaS is a $1 trillion economy, no? I don't know, multi-trillion perhaps. There are record spends every year. Was that the genesis for Quolum? The fact that people are spending, crazy amounts of money on software?
Kind of a genesis. I saw it firsthand at ChargeBee on the other side of the story, that, how merchants have partnered with ChargeBee, and they basically were using products and tools to make their sales process much easier. right? If you look at Gainsight, they make the renewal process easier. If you look at ChargeBee and the cohort of subscription management tools, and then whole supporting infrastructure around sales and marketing, what I saw missing was the analogous set of tools to make the buying process easier do not exist. If you look at procurement of SaaS or software, still old school. If you look at discovery, if you look at compliance, if you look at payment, renewal, it just plain sucks. I'm sure in your job, if your team is using 15 tools, you are like worried about, boss, who's spending what? Am I using, not using? Is my data, customer data leaking, not leaking? So I think that was at least the feature genesis, but the top level is absolutely right. I will add to your comment. I think there are 3 T's that are drivers in this. The first T is the $1 trillion IT spend, which is the $500 million of hardware, $500 million of software. The second T is your $1 trillion of services spend, which is the Infosys and the Capgeminis and the back offices of the world. They do a lot of human labor, and that's where tools will come in and replace some of these, unassisted, human in the loop. And the third T, which is not going to go into SaaS anytime soon, is your telecom and data center and bandwidth and other expenses. So those 3 T's are actually driving this mega shift towards online activation, delivery, provisioning, what we call SaaS.
Right. So who are you selling to at this point of time? CTOs, founders? And
so we are selling to mid-sized businesses. We are actually launching a product for founders. I'm going to reveal to you right now. So we are launching an expense card for exclusively buying SaaS. So think of this as MX for SaaS or a Brex for SaaS. Okay. So you as a founder, you will have a brand new card, and you use that only for buying software services, digital spend, and it will have a supporting infrastructure to manage compliance, discovery, procurement, renewal, and all of that. So you don't kind of intermingle your wine and dining bill of
company
your
card with your
company card, or your travel bill, or your Uber bill with your, hey, my Figma, my Zoom bills are also in that. We are trying to separate that out. So we're launching it pretty soon. So that we are selling to founders. And then the traditional one is going after the mid-sized companies, selling to CFOs and line of business managers, saying, hey, do you know your exposure of SaaS tools? Do you know that your data is leaking on the cloud? Or you have shelfware sitting in your enterprise, you paid X for these tools, nobody's logging in, nobody's using it. So those are the 2 that we are going after. And of course, the much bigger vision is the larger problem that I mentioned.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty interesting actually, because I remember we did an audit not too long ago, and some of the teams were using something like 50 plus tools, right, or software. I mean, and it's insane. I mean, the people who had purchased it did not know why they had purchased it in the first place, right? And it happens, I mean, it totally happens, because these uses as well. I mean, nobody is buying everything for a certain, like an annual plan or something of that sort, right? And then people move on. There are there's so many things, right, which could be like really, really important in the moment, but just becomes redundant even a few months later. And considering, again, SaaS, the good and bad thing, right? Good is like the recurring, bad is also the recurring. So you so you end up paying for something that you don't need very seamlessly. Yeah, so I think this is like a huge problem. So how do you go about solving it? Like, so with all of this infrastructure and everything, so you give a nice little dashboard for people to really understand through insights that, hey, this is where most of my money is going, and here is the ROI I'm seeing. Probably you don't require X, Y, or Z software, or maybe, I mean, you can go and renegotiate or something of that sort. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, so I think you're reading it right, and that's the dashboard part. The underlying foundation is, so we do discovery of the apps at the outset. Hey, do you have these apps in your enterprise? Where are these? These are in your corporate identity system, such as G Suite, Okta, or One Login, whatever SSO tools you use. So we will mine that and discover. Then if you are paying for it, then it is in your finance system. So your accounting software, your Expensify. So we mine that and we discover. Third could be that you are using your personal credit card and you're not even expensing. So then you could, have a mandate from your boss saying, hey, we're not going to reimburse anything unless it is on a company corporate account or paid for, right? So we bring all of those two together, and then we do the analysis of utilization. Hey, let's take example, we are on the Zoom call and we'll say, hey, Roshan, you spent $20 a month on the Zoom account. How many meetings did you do? So the unit of measurement is hours of meetings every month. So we use the public API of Zoom, bring the data in and kind of match up with the dollars that you spend. For $15, $20 you've spent, have you even done 15, 20 hours of meetings per week to have an ROI on this? And then we show it in an aggregated view on the dashboard saying, hey, for Zoom, Figma, Confluence, what's your ROI? If you have not logged in 0 meetings, then of course you should cancel that.
Right. Interesting. So how does it feel like to be a founder again?
Well, it feels like business as usual. I think so the person that gets most impacted being a founder is not you. It's your
family. Yeah.
Yeah. Because for you, you have that mental state of acting like a founder. Does not matter whether you're working for Krish or working for your own self, because you take decisions as if it's your own company. You save money as if it's your own. And of course, you close the business or whatever it's supposed to do as if it has to be done today, right? That's the founder's mindset. So I think that does not change for me. Of course, what changes is that I don't have to report to Krish in this example. So generally, I think it's a problem that you invent and you build the movie script and you find the actors and then you release the product. It's the immense pride that you get in solving an unknown problem. I think that is the kick that drives us every day.
Yeah. So building a business today, right? I mean, is a lot more templatized than it was about 15 years back or even earlier, right? You have, like, I think we just referenced that triple, double or and stuff like that, right? So you have these milestones, you have these metrics to sort of like keep you on the good and virtuous path as such. And you have an ecosystem supporting with you, like for stuff like, hey, how do I hire my first VP of sales? Or, how do I go from 1 million to 5 million? What are 3 things that I should be mindful of? Or, how do I enter this market in Vietnam? And so on and so forth. It's changed, right? I mean, there's so much of information. How does one go about building a business in today's age? Let's say a SaaS business.
I think that's a very good question. So I think definitely I agree with you that there are, majority of it has been templatized. I think what has not been templatized is persistence, grit, honesty, ethics. And you cannot find a template for when you're hiring someone or like finding a VP of sales, impossible to detect whether this person has that attribute, flexibility, growth mindset, lifelong learning attitude. That's not templatized yet. It's easier to build a business if you have people that could support you on building it, right? Because it's a playbook. If you look at what's the guy very famous in
Jason Lemkin?
No, the Frank Slootman, right? So what's that? Databricks, right? Snowflake CEO. How am I missing all of this? He says, yep, there's a template. He's done like 3 IPOs, billion-dollar businesses, one after the other, right? So the reason he has been able to do it because he has a playbook and he executes the playbook with the army of people that he has known from the past, right? So I think if you have a team of 25 core set of people, I think the playbook is very true. But let's also keep in mind that if you're building a business to sell a product, the buyers also have a playbook. So they know more than what they knew 5 years ago. So you cannot just execute a playbook thinking, hey, the LinkedIn channel worked, or the social channel worked, or webinars worked. So the buyers will be there. So buyers have realized that, hey, most of the webinars are a waste of time. I'm not going to go and watch these webinars because I get sales calls after I watch them. So, the webinars have been diluted as a channel for acquisition, right? So I think it's both sides of the story. The playbook is very true, but at the same time, the human elements are not templatized yet. But on the flip side, the buyers are hyper aware.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I think it's easier to start a business right now. I mean, we discussed a few of these elements, whether it's like funding or advice and stuff like that. Easier to start a business, but yeah, building a business, and easier also as a serial entrepreneur to have that core team with you, the few people that you trust with certain things, whatever. That I think is a critical element. But the core part of actually solving a problem for someone, and them being actually willing to part with their hard-earned money, right, or part with their budgets, is a process that I think, it doesn't matter how many businesses you've done before, or it could be 2020 or 2040. I think that is never going to change, right?
I agree. I think for me, I feel that I don't know anything. I'm not going to lie to you. I feel that tomorrow is going to be the last day of whatever I'm doing because all the plans will fail. So irrespective of the template, does not matter what level you are at when executing the template, it's a new day for you. Whether you're Spielberg or any ordinary entrepreneur,
It's that Friday opening.
it's every movie is a new one, right? Every script is a new one. Every Friday you are put to test, right? I think it's the same as that. For me personally, we are at pre-product market fit. I still struggle. I still have conflicts. I still am worried about my execution plans. I'm still worried about my next round of fundraise. I'm still worried about where my first million of revenue is going to come from, whether customers would like the launch that we are doing, whether it's going to accept it or not. All those are still up in the air. So to your point, easier to start, very difficult to get to PMF, and even difficult to get to 10 or 25 million in ARR.
I think a lot of founders listening to this will take heart. The fact that, after these many years working with startups and all of this, I mean, you could still say that, right? So, yeah. So, in this, I'm mindful of time. I know that we're past 15 minutes or so past our time. So, don't want to keep you for long. But before we part, just a final question. What are you optimistic for specifically from an Indian startup perspective as we start this new decade?
I'm super bullish on India from two fronts. One is, if we look at India 10 years ago, during my time in 2010 when I was in Bangalore, the opportunities were limited. There were a handful of consumer startups. They were very early days of venture capital. Now probably there are platforms such as AngelList has an India office, Let's Venture for early angel deals. And both of these platforms and individual angels are doing probably $1 billion, not $1 billion in early stage deals in India, which is like phenomenal.
Yeah, amazing.
I think it's a land of opportunities from an entrepreneurship perspective. But more than tech entrepreneurship, what I feel is there is a much bigger problem to be solved in consumer goods or food and beverage or infrastructure or entertainment, not necessarily tech-driven entertainment, because tech is just an enabler of many of those, and the parallel I could see is, if you have seen the history of the United States, I think 1960s or 1970s, I think that's when the baby boomers, I think 70s, the baby boomers were in that generation. And United States went through a sea change. There were reforms in education, there were reforms in politics and culture and politicking and governance, and that drove a massive expansion in the consumer economy in the US. You could see that something similar is happening in India. There are reforms happening. There is feminism, sexual activism, LGBT rights. So I think we are at that inflection point that India will see a massive 10 to 20x expansion in consumption. So more than tech startups, I think if I had an opportunity, I would start a new soft drink beverage or something like that in a corner in Chennai and package it and, hopefully go national. I think that's one of the big opportunities could be. I'm not kidding. I've seen some stories. I think last year, just before COVID happened, landed at the airport in Bangalore, and I saw samosa outlet or Samosa King. Samosa King, is that Samosa King or something like that?
No, I don't know. I haven't seen that, but I will definitely check it out now.
I think if I'm not wrong, I saw a kiosk called Samosa King next to Chai Point, just outside of the arrival gates at the Bangalore airport. And that got me thinking, because, we are used to the samosas, right? Massive consumption. I don't know the numbers, coming from a thela or coming from a roadside kiosk. Now in this kiosk, beautifully packaged, different varieties, hygienic and clean. I think that's the future, so much so we could think about a cool app, but the samosas are going to sell more.
Yeah. Or the next 99 dosa, right?
or some biryanis or... I think there are hundreds of new brands popping up. I think that's where the expansion is going to happen.
Yeah. So Indus, this has been a fascinating conversation. I think perhaps the most fun conversation I've had in a long, long while. And thank you so much again for your time. I know it's late in the evening and you should get some peaceful founder rest, after a hard day's work. So I'm going to leave you to it. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Roshan. It was a pleasure having you.